In 1935, Harry Hopkins and Hallie Flanagan joined together to put unemployed theater workers across the United States back to work. Their federal theater project set out to bring free, adult, and uncensored theater to all Americans. The FTP triumphantly employed 12,700 people per year and produced over 42,000 productions in its 5-year lifetime. It was Flanagan's goal of an uncensored theater that led to the tragic downfall of the FTP. On June 30, 1939, the FTP's funding was cut by an act of Congress, not as an economic move, but due to accusations of the project being a front for communist activity, and a large number of employees were members of the Communist Party or sympathetic with that of the Communist Party. The tensions between Congress and the FTP foreshadowed congressional hearings of playwrights and the blacklisting of artists during the Red Scare of the 1950s. The tragic shutdown of the project highlighted the effectiveness theater holds as a form of meaningful communication and placed an emphasis on the necessity for future government funding for the arts. In the early 1900s, theater was the most popular form of entertainment in America. But in October 1929, the stock market crashed, sending the United States into its worst economic depression to date. People lost their jobs at exponential rates, and by 1930, 4 million Americans were unemployed, including the majority of theater workers. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt was inaugurated in March 1933, industrial production had fallen to an unprecedented low. Close to 25% of the labor force was unemployed, and more than 5,000 banks had closed. In 1935, President FDR signed the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, into effect. The WPA, headed by Harry Hopkins, set out to create jobs for unemployed people in their areas of skill. The WPA had two purposes: to spur the growth of the crippled American economy and to give hope to the nation's distressed citizens. In response to the number of unemployed artists and low morale in the nation, Harry Hopkins created arts programs within the WPA. There were 4 fully funded arts programs: art, music, writers, and theater. These programs together became known as the Federal One. Harry Hopkins reached out to his longtime friend, groundbreaking American producer and director Hallie Flanagan, to ask that she head the theater wing of the arts projects. On August 27, 1935, Hallie Flanagan became director of the Federal Theater Project and set out to bring free, adult, and uncensored theater across America. The FTP met both purposes of the WPA. It spurred the economy by putting unemployed artists back to work, as well as brought new, inspiring works of theater across the nation to boost morale and to give hope to those in distress. From 1935 to 1939, the Federal Theater Project employed 10,000 people per year on average, and produced 1,200 productions of at least 850 major works and 309 new plays to audiences that estimated 25 million people in over 40 states. Many times the FTP was accused by conservatives in Congress for using their plays as propaganda. Congressman J. Purnell Thomas argued that practically every play presented under the auspices of the project is sheer propaganda for communism or the New Deal. Plays such as The Cradle Will Rock, with strong pro-union messages, 1/3 of a Nation, which called attention to housing conditions in New York, and Woman of Destiny, about a female president who works for peace, were heavily criticized by Congress. Congress used funding cuts as a form of censorship in disguise, and Flanagan spent most of her career fighting these attempts.
I think that speaks primarily to the power of theater, that idea that people are actually getting together. We can see everyone else in the room. Everyone else is hearing that story, and everyone else is listening to those ideas, and those seeds are being planted, and it's so conscious and it's so apparent and it's such a group activity, well, within that, there turns out to be greater power in just in that synergy that is created right there, that those people have all heard that story and then they go out together and they can talk about it and they can act upon it together too, which makes it scarier for a lot of institutional power structures too.
On the day the Cradle Will Rock was scheduled to open, the WPA announced cuts in their arts programs, including the postponement of any new play. This funding cut was seen by Blitzenstein as obvious censorship in a different guise. The cast and crew of the Cradle Will Rock decided to perform their show anyway without government funding. The cast and hundreds of ticket holders marched through New York City to a private theater where the songwriter sat alone on stage at the piano, and actors performed their roles in street clothes from their seats as to not violate any agreements made by their union. This act of defiance signified the beginning of the end of the Federal Theater Project.
A new day had dawned in the theater. The stagnant and supine audience had been killed forever.
Congressmen were furious with Hallie Flanagan and the Federal Theater Project. Congressman Martin Dies formed a committee to find those in and out of the government who were participating in un-American activities. Dies named his committee the House Un-American Activities Committee, the HUAC. Hallie Flanagan was called to appear before HUAC to defend the project on July 26, 1938. The House Un-American Activities Committee lived on long past the FTP and became a big part of the Red Scare in the 1950s, a time at which anti-communist sentiments could not have been stronger in the United States. The HUAC became a key player during the so-called Red Scare by holding many congressional hearings and blacklisting artists, many of whom were involved with the FTP during its lifetime.
Answer yes or no. Are you a member of the Communist Party? Of the Progressive Party? Did you ever give $1 to Royalist Spain? Did you ever sign a petition against the Munn-Ferguson bill?
In October 1950, 10 men from the Hollywood film industry received jail sentences and were banned from working for major Hollywood studios due to accusations very similar of those used against the Federal Theater Project. The FTP set the framework for the HUAC to censor artists and decades to follow. The Federal Theater Project was the first and only time in United States history that the government had a fully funded, fully functioning arts programs. The FTP was the peak of government funding for the arts, and never again would the government play such an active role in the promotion and support of the arts.
That idea that the arts of a country are one of its lasting contributions to civilization, and that awareness that we can't simply rely on rich patronage, and that if we wanted it to tell important, meaningful, and aesthetically inspiring kind of stories, there needs to be that kind of underpinning. And perhaps one way that we can more equitably do that is through our government, through the idea that we'll all pitch in a little bit, and then that will continue.